There is a specific kind of darkness that only exists on the open ocean. At 4 o'clock in the morning, a suffocating pitch black that makes you feel as though you are the only living soul left on the planet. Where are you watching from? This is a fictional story, but the treacherous depths of human greed it explores are as real as the salt in the sea. My name is Victor. I am 72 years old, and I am the founder and absolute owner of a global logistics and shipping empire worth nearly $300 million. I command a fleet of massive cargo vessels that navigate every major trade route in the world, moving billions of tons of freight annually. Yet, despite the massive corporate structure I have meticulously built from scratch, I never felt comfortable sitting in a glass-walled boardroom. I am a man of the docks. I started my career as a simple handyman, a mechanic covered in grease, spending 12 hours a day repairing rusted diesel engines in the freezing rain. Even today, with billions in corporate assets, I still prefer to put on my canvas overalls and work as a handyman on my own ships, tuning engines, checking oil pressure, and replacing valves. The scent of motor oil and sea salt keeps my mind sharp, grounding me in reality when the corporate world tries to pull me into the clouds. I know how to read the complex mechanics of a machine, and I know how to read the psychological machinery of the people around me. But there is one catastrophic failure in my life that no amount of mechanical skill could ever fix. 10 years ago, my world was utterly destroyed. My eldest son, Leo, was aboard a private family yacht off the coast of the Florida Keys when the vessel suffered a massive, unexplained explosion. The Coast Guard searched the flaming wreckage for 3 days, scouring every inch of the coastline, but they found nothing but charred debris drifting on the tide. Leo was gone, my wife, unable to bear the suffocating weight of the grief, passed away 2 years later, her heart literally broken by the loss of our boy. Our sprawling waterfront mansion became a silent, echoing tomb. I resigned myself to spending the rest of my days sailing alone into the twilight, a captain without a crew. But then, at 4:12 this morning, the encrypted satellite phone sitting on my bedside table shattered the silence. I bolted upright, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. Only 5 people in the world had that number. I answered the call, my voice rough with sleep. On the other end of the line, cutting through heavy static and the unmistakable roar of the ocean, was a hoarse, exhausted voice. "Dad, it's me, please. Come to Pier 9. I need you to come pick me up." The blood in my veins turned to absolute ice. The voice was older, strained and broken, but the cadence, the pitch, the slight hesitation before the word "Dad," it was Leo. Pier 9 was an abandoned, rusted-out commercial dock owned by one of my subsidiary companies, a place that hadn't seen a cargo ship in 15 years. I didn't call security. I didn't call the police. I threw on a heavy raincoat, grabbed the keys to my armored SUV, and drove like a madman through the blinding, driving rain. My mind was a chaotic storm of impossible hope and terrifying suspicion. Could it be a miracle? Or was I driving into a sick, twisted trap? When my headlights finally cut through the thick coastal fog and swept across the crumbling concrete of Pier 9, they illuminated a solitary figure standing in the downpour. He was hunched over, shivering violently. I slammed the car into park and sprinted out into the rain. The man looked up, shielding his eyes from the harsh halogen headlights. My breath caught in my throat. The scars on his face were new, jagged lines of pale tissue. But the bone structure, the jawline, the deep-set eyes, it was unmistakable. It was Leo. He lunged forward, throwing his freezing, soaked body into my arms, bursting into heavy, racking sobs. My analytical, hardened mind completely short-circuited. The overwhelming, blinding emotion of a grieving father took over, and I held him as tightly as I possibly could, weeping into his wet shoulder. My son, the boy I had buried in my heart a decade ago, had somehow returned from the dead. But that blinding, euphoric, emotional wave lasted exactly 20 seconds. As we stood there embracing in the freezing rain, the razor-sharp instincts of a man who had survived 50 years in the cutthroat shipping industry suddenly kicked in. The human brain is a remarkable machine. It can process anomalies faster than any supercomputer. When you hold someone you deeply love, someone you have mourned for a decade, your senses automatically go into a state of hyper-alertness, searching for familiar anchor points. I tightened my grip around his shoulders, waiting for it. I waited for the sequence, since Leo was 7 years old and terrified of severe coastal thunderstorms. We had developed a secret distress code. It was a silent physical language known only to the two of us. Whenever we embraced after a long, dangerous voyage, or whenever he was frightened, I would tap his shoulder twice, and he would respond by tapping the center of my back 3 times in rapid succession. It meant, the storm is over, we are safe. We had done it thousands of times. It was ingrained in his muscle memory as deeply as breathing. I tapped his shoulder twice. I waited 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The man standing in my arms did absolutely nothing. His hands remained limply clutching the fabric of my raincoat, completely chaotic and uncoordinated. He had no idea the secret distress code even existed. In that microsecond, my heart broke all over again, but the sorrow was instantly incinerated by a terrifying, glacial fury. The man crying on my shoulder was an exact physical replica of my son, down to the millimeter, but he was a ghost. He was an incredibly talented, surgically altered imposter. Someone had weaponized the face of my dead son to infiltrate my empire. I didn't pull away in horror. I didn't accuse him. If my enemies believed they had successfully breached my defenses, I needed to let them believe it. I needed them to walk confidently into the minefield. I gently patted his back, mimicking the actions of a vulnerable, overjoyed, confused old man, and guided him into the passenger seat of the heavy SUV. "Let's go home, Leo," I said, my voice trembling with perfectly faked emotion. "Let's get you home." The drive back to the estate was suffocating. He told me a harrowing, perfectly rehearsed story about being pulled from the burning yacht by smugglers, losing his memory from the severe head trauma, and spending the last 10 years working as forced labor on a remote fishing vessel off the coast of South America until he finally remembered who he was. It was a brilliant narrative, explicitly designed to explain away any gaps in his memory and the physical changes to his body. But as he spoke, my mind was running 1,000 calculations a second. Who had the financial resources to orchestrate a 10-year psychological operation? Who had access to Leo's confidential medical records to sculpt a perfect facial replica? The circle of suspects was incredibly small, and it pointed directly inside my own house. The next morning, I instructed my head butler to prepare a massive, celebratory breakfast in the grand dining room. I needed to run a biological diagnostic that no amount of acting lessons or surgical procedures could ever fake. The imposter sat across from me, wearing one of Leo's old cashmere sweaters. He looked entirely comfortable, confident in his performance. The butler placed a lavish spread on the table, including a silver bowl of spicy peanut satay sauce, a staple in our household. The real Leo had a severe violent allergy to a specific enzyme found in raw peanuts. It wasn't just a mild rash, it was catastrophic anaphylaxis. It was a medical detail we had kept strictly confidential, known only to our private physician and our immediate family. The man sitting across from me casually scooped a massive spoonful of the peanut sauce onto his eggs and began eating heartily. He didn't hesitate. He didn't reach for an EpiPen. He simply chewed and smiled, asking me questions about the logistics company's stock portfolio. He had just failed test number 2, but the final, most devastating test was about to walk into the room. I heard the familiar clicking of claws on the hardwood floor. Duke, our 14-year-old German shepherd, slowly wandered into the dining room. He was half blind, his muzzle was completely white, and his hips were failing him. But a dog's olfactory memory is flawless. An organic DNA scanner that cannot be deceived by plastic surgery or intensive actor training. Duke had slept at the foot of Leo's bed every single night for the first 4 years of his life. Duke stopped 3 feet away from the imposter's chair. If this had been the real Leo, Duke would have lost his mind with joy, whining, spinning, and burying his head in his lap. Instead, the old dog froze completely. The fur on the back of his neck bristled. He let out a low, dangerous, rumbling growl from deep within his chest, baring his yellowed teeth at the absolute stranger sitting in his master's chair. The imposter froze, his spoon hovering in midair. He tried to laugh it off, reaching a hand out cautiously. "Hey, Duke, it's me, buddy. It's Leo." Duke snapped his jaws, barking aggressively, backing away toward the kitchen door. He refused to let the man touch him, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, suppressing the violent urge to drag the man across the table. "He's just old, Leo," I said smoothly. "His mind is going, give him time." Before the imposter could respond, the heavy mahogany doors of the dining room swung open. My daughter Clara walked in, holding a sleek leather briefcase. She was the chief operations officer of the logistics empire, a brilliant, cutthroat executive who had inherited my ruthlessness but none of my ethics. Right behind her was her fiancé Marcus. Marcus was a corporate auditor, a man with cold, calculating eyes, who always seemed to be analyzing the liquidation value of everything he touched. Clara stopped dead in her tracks. She dropped her briefcase onto the floor, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she gasped, her voice trembling. "Leo, is it really you?" She sprinted across the room, throwing her arms around the imposter's neck, bursting into loud, dramatic tears. Marcus stood in the doorway, a look of profound shock plastered across his face. It was a beautiful, heartwarming family reunion. To anyone else, it would have looked like an absolute miracle. But I was watching the micro-expressions. I was watching the precise timing. There was a delay. When Clara saw Leo, it took her exactly 1 full second to register shock and begin crying. Genuine human surprise is instantaneous. A 1-second delay is the hallmark of a brain retrieving a pre-rehearsed script. Furthermore, when Clara hugged him, she didn't bury her face in his neck. She looked over his shoulder, her eyes darting directly to Marcus, giving him a microscopic, confirming nod. Marcus didn't look like a man witnessing a resurrection. He looked like a corrupt auditor watching a massive, illicit asset transfer successfully clear the bank. The nausea hit me like a physical blow. My own daughter, my own flesh and blood, conspiring with her fiancé, had orchestrated this monstrous deception to steal the empire. They thought they were playing a brilliant game of chess against a senile, grieving old man. They didn't realize they had just invited a wolf into their own trap. That night, after the massive mansion fell completely silent, I didn't go to sleep. I put on a dark coat and walked quietly down to the sub-basement of the estate. Hidden behind a false concrete wall in the wine cellar was my secret room, a highly secure, climate-controlled server hub that housed the encrypted digital backups for the entire global logistics corporation. Waiting for me inside was Russell, my chief of information security. Russell was a ghost in the machine, a former military hacker who owed his life to me and possessed absolute loyalty. "Mr. Harrington," Russell said quietly, the blue light of the monitors reflecting off his glasses. "The digital forensic audit is complete. You aren't going to like this." I stood behind him, crossing my arms tightly. "Show me the leak, Russell. How long has the hull been breached?" Russell pulled up a staggering wall of data logs on the primary screen. "Over the past 18 months, Clara's executive credentials have been used to access your highly restricted, private inheritance trust files exactly 52 times. Every single access occurred between 2 and 4 in the morning. She bypassed the standard corporate firewalls using a sophisticated backdoor protocol." I stared at the timestamps, each one a separate, agonizing stab of betrayal. Clara had meticulously studied every legal loophole in my estate plan. She had searched for a way to override the corporate succession protocols, specifically looking for clauses that detailed what would happen if a deceased primary heir were to miraculously return. "She wasn't just looking at the money," Russell continued, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. "She downloaded Leo's complete medical history, his biometric data, his dental records, and hours of high-definition home video footage. She compiled a master psychological and physical profile. To build the perfect replica," I murmured, my voice devoid of emotion, entirely consumed by tactical coldness. "Did you run the DNA test on the hair I pulled from his jacket this morning?" Russell hit a key, and a laboratory report flashed onto the screen. 0% match, sir. He is absolutely not your son. Using facial recognition software tied to international databases, I identified him. His real name is Silas Vance. He's a disgraced former stage actor with a rap sheet for wire fraud and confidence scams. He fell off the grid 3 years ago. Medical records from a black market clinic in Belarus show he underwent extensive craniofacial reconstruction surgery. They literally chiseled his jawbone to perfectly match Leo's. Clara and Marcus had spent millions of dollars to sculpt a living ghost, intending to use my grief as a weapon to force me to sign over the empire. But Russell wasn't finished. The most shocking revelation was still waiting in the digital ether. "Sir, there's more," Russell said, his voice dropping to an anxious whisper. "While I was tracing the dark money wire transfers Marcus used to pay the surgical clinic, I found a recurring payment being sent to a shell company in the Caribbean. I hacked the shell company's surveillance feeds. I think you need to sit down." I didn't sit down. I leaned closer to the monitor. Russell brought up a live satellite feed, zooming in on a small, isolated agricultural compound, heavily surrounded by armed guards on a private island in the Bahamas. The camera angle was high, but the resolution was sharp. A man was walking across the dirt courtyard, carrying a heavy sack of grain on his shoulder. He moved with a distinct, uneven limp. He turned his face toward the sun, and the satellite captured his profile perfectly. My heart completely stopped. The air vanished from my lungs. It was Leo, the real Leo. He was older, his hair was graying, and he looked weathered, scarred, and exhausted, but it was undoubtedly my son. The yacht explosion 10 years ago had been entirely real, but he had survived. Clara and Marcus hadn't just discovered that he was alive. They had actively kept him imprisoned on a black site island for years. They knew that if the real Leo returned, he would never sign the predatory corporate takeover contracts they had designed. They needed a puppet, an imposter they could perfectly control. So they kept my true son locked in a cage while they paraded a monster through my front door. A terrifying volcanic rage ignited in the deepest part of my soul. They hadn't just tried to steal my money, they had stolen a decade of my son's life. "Russell," I said, my voice completely steady, radiating a lethal calm. "Assemble the private extraction team. I want heavily armed boots on that island in 6 hours. Bring my son home, understood, sir?" Russell nodded. "And what about Clara, Marcus, and the imposter?" "They are about to learn what happens when you try to sink a ship while the captain is still at the helm," I replied, turning toward the heavy steel door of the secret room. I didn't wait for morning. I walked silently through the dark, opulent hallways of the mansion, heading straight toward the guest wing. I had one loose end to tie up before the board meeting tomorrow, and his name was Silas Vance. I approached the heavy oak door of his bedroom, intending to confront him. But as I reached for the brass handle, I paused. Through the thick wood, I overheard the frantic, panicked whispering of a man who realized he was standing on a trapdoor. "Marcus, you can't do this." Silas was begging over a burner phone, his voice trembling with sheer, unadulterated terror. "I did exactly what you asked. I fooled the old man. He bought the entire act. Why are you changing the extraction plan?" There was a pause as Marcus spoke on the other end. I pressed my ear closer to the wood, listening intently. "A fatal car accident?" Silas hissed, his voice cracking. "What do you mean, a fatal car accident?" "We agreed on $2 million and a new passport. You're going to kill me the second he signs the papers tomorrow, aren't you? You're tying up loose ends. I won't let you do this." "I'll tell him everything." Marcus had made a fatal mistake. In his ruthless arrogance, he had tried to betray his own co-conspirator before the ink was even dry, turning his puppet into a desperate, cornered animal. I turned the brass handle, pushing the door open silently. Silas spun around, his phone dropping from his shaking hand, bouncing off the Persian rug. He stared at me, his eyes wide with absolute, primal horror, realizing that the confused old man had just heard his entire death sentence. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten him. I walked over to the small sitting chair, sat down, and calmly poured a glass of water from the nightstand pitcher. I slid it across the table toward him. "Drink," I commanded softly. "You look like you're about to pass out." Silas, the sound of his real name hitting the air shattered his final defense. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the floor in front of me, sobbing hysterically. "Mr. Harrington, please, please, you have to help me," Silas begged, crawling forward and grabbing the hem of my trousers. "Marcus is going to kill me tomorrow. They hired me, they forced me into this. I have proof, I have everything." "I know," I said, looking down at him with clinical detachment. "Marcus and Clara view you as a disposable asset. The moment I sign the corporate transfer documents tomorrow morning, Marcus will have the brakes cut on your car. You will drive off a cliff, and all the evidence of their fraud will conveniently die with you. Silas was hyperventilating, sweat pouring down his surgically altered face. He scrambled over to his travel bag, ripped open the inner lining, and pulled out a small, encrypted black USB drive. He shoved it into my hands with desperate urgency. "Take it." "It's all there," Silas cried. "The wire transfers, the audio recordings of Marcus coaching me, the medical files from the clinic in Belarus. It proves they orchestrated the entire thing. Just please don't let them kill me." I pocketed the heavy USB drive, the final nail in their coffin secured. "You are going to attend the board meeting tomorrow morning, Silas," I said coldly. "You will smile, you will play your part perfectly, and you will wait for my signal. If you deviate from the script by a single word, I will hand you over to Marcus myself. Do we understand each other?" Silas nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face, completely broken and subservient. The stage was set, the explosive charges were planted, all that was left was to push the detonator. The following morning, the atmosphere in the executive boardroom on the 50th floor of the corporate tower was electric with tension. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the massive mahogany table, where the 12 senior board members were gathered. Clara sat directly to my right, wearing a sharp designer suit, her posture rigid and exuding predatory confidence. Marcus stood behind her, his arms crossed, a smug, victorious smirk playing on his lips. Silas sat quietly at the end of the table, pale and sweating, keeping his eyes firmly glued to the polished wood. "Gentlemen," Clara began, her voice ringing with false authority. "As you all know, we have experienced a profound miracle. My brother Leo has returned to us. Given the incredible emotional strain this has placed on our father, and to ensure the absolute stability of the global supply chain, Victor has decided to step down as CEO. He will be signing the Accelerated Inheritance Protocol and the transfer of our new AI logistical network directly to Marcus's holding company." She slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the table toward me. A gold-plated fountain pen rested on top. "Sign it, Dad," Clara said softly, feigning loving concern. "It's time to rest. Let us carry the burden now." I picked up the heavy gold pen. I let the silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds. The board members watched with bated breath. Marcus leaned forward slightly, eager to witness the culmination of his grand theft. I set the pen down gently on the table. I didn't sign. "Clara," I said, my voice echoing with terrifying, absolute calm, "do you know the first rule of maintaining a seaworthy vessel?" Clara frowned, confusion momentarily breaking her confident facade. "Dad, this isn't the time for sailing metaphors. Just sign the papers, the first rule," I continued, standing up slowly, towering over the table, "is that you never allow a venomous rat to chew through the hull. And you, my dear daughter, have infested my ship." The boardroom erupted into frantic whispers. Marcus's smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a dark scowl. "Victor, your grief is confusing you. You need to sign the documents before the market opens, or the stock will plummet." "I am not confused, Marcus," I said, signaling to Russell, who was standing quietly in the corner of the room. "I am finally seeing clearly." Russell pressed a button on a remote control. The massive digital presentation screen behind me roared to life. The audio and video files from Silas's USB drive exploded across the room. The board members gasped in horror as they listened to crystal-clear recordings of Marcus coaching Silas on how to mimic Leo's voice. They saw high-definition scans of the illegal wire transfers Clara had authorized to the black market surgical clinic. They saw irrefutable, undeniable proof of a massive corporate conspiracy and attempted extortion. Clara shot to her feet, her face completely drained of blood, looking like a cornered animal. "This is fake. This is AI-generated slander. He's gone insane. Security, remove him." Marcus panicked, his eyes darting toward the exits. The grand illusion was shattering into a million pieces. The 12 elite board members were left entirely speechless, staring at Clara and Marcus with unvarnished disgust and horror. The fraud was utterly, completely discovered. "You want to talk about insanity, Clara?" I roared, my voice shaking the glass walls of the boardroom. "You kept your own brother locked in a cage on a remote island for years just to steal my company. You traded his life for a seat at this table. Before Clara could stammer out a pathetic lie, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open with a resounding crash. The room fell into a deathly, paralyzing silence. Standing in the doorway, flanked by 4 heavily armed private extraction operatives, was a man wearing a simple, borrowed suit. He limped slightly as he walked into the room. His face was weathered, his hair graying, and a large burn scar ran down the side of his neck. Silas, the imposter, scrambled out of his chair and backed away in terror, immediately replaced in the physical space by the true heir of the empire. It was Leo, the real Leo. He didn't look at the shocked board members. He didn't look at Clara, who had collapsed back into her chair, whimpering in absolute terror as the reality of her impending doom crushed her. Leo walked straight toward me. He reached out his weathered, scarred arms and embraced me tightly. Then, without missing a beat, he tapped the center of my back 3 times in rapid succession. 1, 2, 3. The storm was over. We were safe. Tears of absolute, overwhelming joy finally spilled down my cheeks as I held my true son for the first time in 10 agonizing years. The emotional reunion shattered Marcus's fragile grip on reality. He realized he was not only bankrupt and exposed, but he was looking at decades in federal prison for kidnapping and fraud. The sheer desperation of a trapped rat overtook him. "No!" Marcus screamed, his face contorted into a mask of pure unhinged rage. He lunged across the mahogany table, grabbing the heavy gold pen, aiming it like a makeshift weapon directly at Leo's throat, intending to finish the murder he had started a decade ago. He didn't make it halfway across the table. My lead security operative moved with terrifying speed. He intercepted Marcus mid-lunge, grabbed him by the collar of his expensive suit, and punched him squarely in the jaw with the force of a sledgehammer. The sickening crack of bone echoed through the room. Marcus's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed heavily onto the floor, out cold, his jaw visibly dislocated. Seconds later, a team of FBI agents swarmed into the boardroom, carrying federal arrest warrants. They dragged the unconscious Marcus off the floor, snapping heavy steel cuffs around his wrists. Clara didn't try to run. She sat frozen in her chair, weeping uncontrollably as an agent read her rights. As the cold steel clicked around her wrists, Marcus suddenly regained consciousness. Spitting blood onto the pristine carpet, he glared at Clara with manic, hateful eyes. "Tell him, Clara!" Marcus screamed frantically as the agents dragged him toward the door. "Tell your precious father the truth. Tell him who actually planted the explosive charge on the yacht 10 years ago. Tell him it was your idea." The entire room froze once again. I looked at Clara, the horrific realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't just discovered Leo was alive. She was the one who had tried to murder him in the first place, all to eliminate her rival for the inheritance. Clara couldn't meet my eyes. She hung her head, sobbing as the agents marched her out of the room. Her life, her wealth, and her freedom entirely destroyed by her own monstrous, limitless greed. Silas, the imposter, was taken into federal custody, but due to his full cooperation and his surrender of the critical evidence, he received a reduced sentence in a minimum security facility, forever banned from returning to the outside world of high society. The storm finally broke, and the turbulent ocean returned to a state of profound, peaceful calm. I officially retired the very next day, handing complete control of the logistics empire over to Leo. Despite the years of unimaginable hardship, his mind was sharper than ever, tempered by a resilience that no boardroom could ever teach. He took the helm of the company and steered it toward unprecedented prosperity, instituting massive charitable programs to help victims of human trafficking and abuse. I spend my days quietly on the estate now, working as a handyman, fixing the old wooden docks and repairing boat engines with my son by my side. We lost a decade to the darkness of human greed, but we found something infinitely more valuable in the wreckage. We learned that true wealth is not found in offshore bank accounts, corporate acquisitions, or luxury mansions. True wealth is the unbreakable bond of a family that refuses to let the other sink. Never let the glittering illusion of money blind you to the venomous snakes hiding in your own house. And never forget that justice, no matter how long it takes, always finds a way to reach the shore. The ocean of life is vast, But as long as we hold true to our moral compass, we will always find our way home.